Hello everyone and welcome. This is the final video in the Shadows over Camelot series, and now I am going to paint Merlin. Before I begin talking about painting Merlin, and while I still have everyone's attention, if you enjoyed the video, please subscribe and share this video. Help me reach the first goal I set myself and reach 100 subscribers. Now, for his base coat, so to speak, for his cloak, I used a 50-50 mixture of Mechanica Standard Grey and White Scar. I wanted to give him a base coat that white could come on as a highlight, so to speak. And I chose this route so that white can still be visible while still brightening up the color later on. However, I did not take into account that there is too much gray if I do this. So later on you will see me paint his secondary cloak thingy, the lower part of it, with a different color because I realized this was a very drab miniature, not necessarily you know, bad, but it lacked color. So I will change that a bit later on when I realize that something is not working. I filled in basically all his robes, including over his necklace and so on, because I knew that I would come back with a metallic color and it would be fine over it. You don't need to stress yourself about details at this process, and I certainly did not. This is just for me to get a coat of paint on most of the miniature, or at least most of the miniature that gets that particular color. Next I tried wet blending a bit of White Scar directly into the already painted base coat, but that didn't seem to work out very well. So I went back again with more of the same mixture and fill it in. I left it in the end like you see it all over the front of the miniature, and I think that really helped because light should be coming from the front of the miniature. So that is what I did, and I left the back of the robes which would seem to be in a bit more shadow. Then I went back again with the same 50-50 mixture and went over all of the lower folds. While I only see sort of like very big differences in between the shades, and this is even for gray, because I saw that big blotch of white right there when I started painting. I don't often see the difference between my highlights, or I see it way too stark. If I can see it, then I think it's much too bright, and I feel that when it dries it will stick out and not really wet blend. Now I know that you're supposed to do multiple passes and mix and match, but it's frightening for me, and I feel that I will mess it up. That is why you see me doing multiple strokes and times and going back and forth with all the colors. But in the end, I think I actually nailed it. I can't wait to test out new methods, and I'm seriously going to invest more and more in contrast paints because they look absolutely amazing. I even tried some on this miniature as well, and we'll get to it when we get to it. But I'm more than happy with how he came out, especially since I used a dry brushing technique, not necessarily for watercolors. But again, I keep getting ahead of myself. And as I said about contrast paints, this is one of the recent ones that was purchased along with Logan Grimnar, and this is called Granta Fur, I think, something like that. But I used it to shade his upper cape, and it gave out the feeling of actual worn out leather with both dark and lighter patches. And I absolutely love the effect that it gave on that. It brought a spot of color, just not enough on the miniature, and that is why I will go back on his lower cape with a different color. And yeah, look, even though it's on pure white primer, that contrast paint does its work, and it goes in all of the recesses and pools there, giving off a much darker color, whereas on the higher edges and on the flat edges it lightens considerably. And I absolutely love this effect that contrast paints have, and can't wait to use it more often. A little touch up with the previous gray mixture, and I move on to the staff. For the staff, I used Rhinox hide. I know it's kind of counterproductive, using fur for leather and contrast paints, uh, which could have been used for wood texture, and then using a base color for his staff. I tried to add a bit more texture with some different color later on, but I don't know how to do that really well, and it doesn't look that great. But I'm happy with how it came out in the end. And besides, this is the last one I want to get it done. So yeah, I went with a very dark color for his staff. I don't know why, but it needed a bit of contrast against that gray, and it's pretty light. Okay. Moving on, fix a little wardrobe malfunction. And next I apply the same 50-50 gray and white scar all over his fur trim of his cloak. I will apply the same technique to his hair as well, but and it, while it does not uh, offer a variation between his hair and his fur cloak, I actually like it. It offers a different feel to the miniature, while not necessarily realistic, while not necessarily aesthetic. I like it. I don't know why I like it, but I just do, even though it sort of feels the same, but it does. The reason why I pasted again with this gray is because I will come later and do a much more uh, visible dry brush of white scar over the gray. The reason I move between elements is to give each of them time to dry. Next, I did his vambrace, which seemed metallic, so I used a bit of iridescent silver on it, as well as the top of his staff, which should have like a dragon or something carved, and it would have been interesting to have it the same wooden texture, but it was really dark and I wanted it to stand out, so I used the same iridescent silver. Not iridescent silver, sorry, I used Runefang steel because I used the Citadel paint. Runefang steel, and yeah, this should give it a bit of context. I didn't want to use gold because the legends, the way I remember it, while Merlin may be different in different authors' interpretations, um, he wasn't always, stand out. Didn't have gold and stuff like that. He seemed to me a bit more humble, and that is why I chose silver. I also touched up on his necklaces and his charms, and then went with XV88 all over his pouches and his flask. This gave, again, this is a base color, and when I come with the shade, all the details stand out and they will look absolutely amazing. I tend to make this mistake often. I don't wait for a paint to dry before I attempt to fix something. For example, here the XV88 was a little droopy, let's go with that, and it spilled a little outside of where I wanted to go, and I didn't fully wait for it to dry before coming back with the gray mixture to fix my mistake. Fortunately, this time it worked out, but oftentimes I have to go about an extensive cleaning phase just to fix any mistakes. I used the same XV88 for his other vambrace, which seemed to be wrapped in leather. And now on to the white dry brushing. Again, dry brushing is supposed to be taking a lot of paint and whisking it off on a top paper towel and then spilling it all over the miniature in light strokes. And it worked out great. Now, another mistake that I did here, but fortunately this time it was a fortuitous one because I was very careful. Dry brushing you're supposed to do before applying contrast paints or anything like that because the process can get a little messy. Fortunately for me, I didn't actually make a mistake and I did not spill over any of the contrast paints, the Gorgranta fur. Uh, Next, I used a bit of Bugman's Glow to undercoat and base coat all of his skin, his hands, and his face. And as you can see, another mistake was made all over his vambrace, and I had come in with a empty brush without any paint on it and clean everything up with a bit of water. I removed as much paint as I could before coming back again with Runefang Steel and filling in where the uh, brush couldn't reach due to the bristles being too big in between the lines of the picture. And again, pay more attention to what I am doing and make sure the paint does not spill. Also, uh, I don't think you've noticed, but it's much more clear to me now that I have started using a lot less paint on my brush. When I started painting, I used to fill my brush almost to the base of the bristles, and it would even damage my brushes, even though I saw all the tutorials saying, don't do that, that's a bad idea. Uh, but now I learned my lesson and rather do a lot more passes and take up much more, many more times, not much more, million more times, load up the brush with paint rather than doing a lot on one brush and destroying the brush as well as spilling too much paint on the model and having it go wherever it wanted instead of where I wanted. As I mentioned, Bugman Glow for the base coat of the face, and then I will come back with layers of Kislev flesh and Flador flesh. And now I move on to a bit of the shading, and I use Agrex Earthshade for the leathery bits. This really helps smooth everything out. Ideally, on top of this, I should be coming with another highlight layer and increasing the colors, bring them back to their brightness, come back with XV88 at least on the highest parts of the items that I have just shaded. But I find that it looks good as is, and it, especially for the quality I was going for tabletop quality, I use the same aggressor shade to shade the silvery bits a bit more. I don't know why I did this, because I was going to get null oil afterwards, but I put a little bit on the necklace as well for some reason. I can't really remember why. I added the aggressor sheet over the hands and the Bugman Glow to better see the edges between the fingers and for visibility. That is why I did it. And I go back with an unloaded brush and remove as much as I want from the parts that I placed it. I also go around the base with Aggrexar sheet. I decided to just paint this over the white primed base and try brush it with a bit of white, and I think that is more than enough for this miniature. Again, it's Merlin, he's not supposed to be the focus of it, it's just a small part, but it's also something really simple and it seemed to work, so I went with that. Definitely when dry brushing, you need to wait for the previous layers to dry. This is something that I learned very early on when I started painting. If you don't, it's just going to be a mess and you will not be able to properly dry brush. And now you can see me attempting to lighten the color and to give a bit of texture to his robes. So using incredibly light strokes, I went over all his robes and catch just the briefest edge with the white scar. And I especially liked how using this dry brush, this small dry brush from Citadel, actually created a few lines that gave the impression of a fabric. I'm going to experiment more with this and I'm going to bust that little brush even more to gain a much larger variation, and hopefully this will be my little secret weapon, because again it looks absolutely amazing. Again, when looked at very close or by somebody with much better eyesight than me. And of course I do the same like I mentioned on the base, and as you saw I still had a lot of paint on. So the first few strokes were more along the lines of an overbrush, whereas here is an actual dry brush. Overbrushing is the part where you use a lot of paint instead of a little paint. And it has its usefulness. In order for me to fix that bit of overbrush over there, I come back with a bit more Agrax Earthshade, just a few touches here and there to dull out all that bright white. And it worked. It worked really well. A few more dry brushing strokes just to bring up the edges of this cloak. And now I decided that there wasn't enough color on this miniature, and I wanted to make his lower cloak, the lower part of his cloak, different color. And I wanted to test out a different paint, so I chose a different color, Militarum green I think, and another contrast paint. So I went all over the cloak with it, trying to keep everything sort of in the same strokes to give the fabric a little bit, and to make sure that the previous dry brushing was still visible underneath, especially since contrast paints are sort of like a filter applied everything, and I didn't want to waste all that effort. And it came out looking really good, and it gave a spot of color on the miniature, which it sorely needed. Moving on to his face, I tried doing the eyeballs first, and apparently this is actually a much better option. While everyone is saying, and I totally agree, because it really stands out, and the eyes should be done with an off-white color because you don't have pure white on your eyeballs. I just went with the white scar over it because again I am going for tabletop quality and because it was already on the palette. And also I don't have any Shanti bone or off-white color uh, so, at the moment. I did the same thing for his beard and tried to lightly uh, make sure put um, white scar all over his beard without the undercoat of gray because I felt it would give a better visibility over his beard. And also I left his lips and his mouth just with the Bugman glow. I did not touch it, deciding that it would be the best way to emphasize that there are more blood vessels in that area of the face and to have it you know stand out as well, so against all his other facial skin and features. I had to go back and forth several times for his eyes in order to get it just the way I want. The next step was taking a bit of Kislev flesh and go over all of the skin on the face. While I'm not sure it was specifically designed to do so, the tiny little imperfections in the plastic on the face actually made it look like proper skin and worn out blemishes and irregularities in our skin. But I am really looking forward to working on some finer detail miniatures because the quality of these, while awesome, still left a little bit of desire while still having awesome miniatures, them being the knights and the board game miniatures in general. Next, I wanted to try out a new addition to my um, paint ranges. While I don't have Gilliman Flesh as a contrast paint yet, and it's on the list, I did get in the latest batch Seraphim Sepia, and I looked forward to testing it on this miniature for as a replacement for Gilliman Flesh. And because I used a little bit too much, I did came with an empty paintbrush and just whisked off all of the excess wash. And as you can see, when it dries, you can barely notice it, but it is an effect. That is awesome. For the eyes, I went with Macragge Blue and tried to touch it as lightly as possible to give him his pupils, not his pupils, his irises, because ideally I should be able to put another black dot with pupil inside the blue, but that's going to be almost impossible on such a tiny miniature and such tiny eyes. Next, I went with a bit of, again, Rhine oxide on parts of the satchel and with a tiny bit of white mixed into the XV88 to highlight over small parts of the vambrace and the satchel. And I have to say, I think it came out awesome, almost like I seen in other miniature painting videos and tutorials with edge highlighting and so on. I'm not going to apply it liberally on all of my models going forward, but I'm starting to get how it should be used and when I should use it. So look forward to that. And we are approaching the end of the video. I'm just doing a few touch-ups, but I will let you enjoy the final shots. Urge you again to please share the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe as well. Help me reach 100 subscribers, the goal I set, and my very first goal. It's been a long time coming, and apparently people are excited for the unboxing that I did. Check that out also if you like. Alright, no more chit-chatting from me. Enjoy the final video and the final shots, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!